Do you know this one truth about complex childhood trauma? What happened was not your fault. We all know this rationally, but we don't feel this emotionally. Instead, we have all of these weird symptoms that make us dysfunction in our daily lives, and often we can't even explain them and feel at the mercy of our own bodies, which is absolutely frustrating. In order to resolve these symptoms, you have to understand them first, and this is why we go today through 10 common symptoms of complex trauma from childhood. I will explain each of them and then give you relatable examples, and in the end, I will offer you solutions to the symptoms, so let's do this together. Welcome to today's episode. My name is Robert, and today's video is based on my favorite paper about childhood trauma, which is called Adult Survivors of Childhood Trauma. Definitely link that in the description below. I'm not a therapist myself, but I review the symptoms from a practical client's perspective. And without further ado, I just want to jump in to symptom number 1 with you. Are you chronically on high alert around other people? That's symptom number 1 here. And what it is, when we are chronically on high alert, it's called hypervigilance. That means that we are constantly scanning the environment. We are alert to hidden dangers around us, and often those dangers are not even real. But what's really important here to understand is that when we are constantly scanning, when we are on high alert, there was a helpful strategy to save us as children. And when we are in that hypervigilant state, we often also struggle with setting our boundaries. In this state, we feel permeably or easily irritated. And some examples here: when you're hypervigilant, you are often very careful what you say and how you behave, because a part in you always says, be careful, watch out. And I think we all know these situations. Now imagine that you are at a small gathering and you sit there quietly and you are already somehow hypervigilant and you notice every detail. The whispers of the people, the glances, the laughter around you, and suddenly a friend comes to you and says, hey, you're so quiet tonight, everything okay? And your heart already starts racing, eyes wide open. Suddenly you feel like everyone is watching you. I'm fine, you say, forcing a smile, but inside you're panicking. Are they judging me? Am I being awkward? Overwhelmed and exhausted, you then leave early, blaming on being tired, but deep down, you know your hypervigilance made it impossible to stay there and to relax. Symptom number 2, do you often disconnect from the world around you? This is called dissociation. And it's typical because survivors of childhood trauma often lose track of time and place. And when you experience that, you disconnect from yourself and from the world around you. In severe cases of dissociation, we also talk about experiences of depersonalization or derealization, and I made a full episode about that up here and in the description below in case you want to check it out. Dissociation is an emergency survival mechanism of the body and the mind to protect you and cope with stress, for example, during a traumatic event. And let's give you some examples here. Let's say that's pretty typical. I have that quite often. When you're around your partner and he or she is in an angry state, and your mom or dad, for example, also was often angry and then punished you or screamed at you or hurt you and abused you in any form, then you will also feel that fear when your partner is in rage and start eventually to disconnect. You dissociate when your partner is in a state of anger then. And what happens then is you're not longer aware of the things and the discussion with your partner around you, you just zone out. That's also typical for children who have been sexually abused, and everything that's related to abused or violence on a physical level is especially a high trigger for dissociation. I describe dissociation to you right now. How does it feel like in case you still cannot really relate to it? Well, you feel like you're in a state of a tunnel, like being in a tunnel. Your field of vision narrows, sounds and colors become blurred and unrecognizable. You experience some kind of out-of-body experience, but in an unpleasant way, or you feel that you're a bit drunk, but also unpleasantly. Symptom number 3. Do you struggle with regulating intense emotions? Well, then you might experience emotional dysregulation. And emotional dysregulation is often especially around emotions such as anger, grief, anxiety, and shame. And I describe it like this: those emotions completely fill you up, they take you over. You can't control your emotional world, you can't regulate yourself anymore. And when you are in such a state, at the slightest trigger, you react irritably or lose control over your emotions. Resentment and heavy grief are the most intense emotions that can happen in those states. And in the worst case, those heavy emotionally dysregulated states also lead people to thinking about ending their lives because it seems like, an easy way out, or it leads them to harm themselves, for example, through cutting themselves, through hurting or beating themselves. And I want to let you know, if you are in such a state or if you know someone who is hurting themselves, definitely look for professional support. Please look for therapy and help, because this is emotional dysregulation. This is a trauma symptom and it's resolvable. I read a short story recently and I thought that's a perfect example of emotional dysregulation. And I want to tell that story to you now. And it's about a couple. Let's name them Emma and Jake, okay? Emma and Jake are cooking dinner together that one evening when Jake says to Emma, "Emma, you never measure ingredients. You're always just winging it." Emma freezes because the comments feels like criticism to her, triggering memories of being judged as a child. Her chest tightens and she snaps, "I can't do anything right, can I?" before slamming the pan down and leaving the room, overwhelmed by shame and anger. Jake, confused, says, "I wasn't criticizing you, I was joking." Later, after calming down, Emma explains to him, "It felt like I was being criticized again, like when I was a kid. I just got overwhelmed." And that's a perfect example here for emotional dysregulation, how it happens within our daily lives. Symptom number 4, do you have medically unexplainable body symptoms? And oh my gosh, this is a huge indicator. So when you have those body symptoms, which you might not can explain, then those are typically reactions to your trauma. It's a trauma response. And those somatic symptoms are, for example, irritable bowel syndrome, pain in your gut, in your chest, in your throat, chronic fatigue, sweating, a loss of appetite, or other forms of chronic pain here. And those states are often also associated with heavy emotional states. So you feel a heavy emotion, you are triggered, for example, in a dysregulated state, and then those somatic symptoms add on top of that. And this is why Peter Levine always says trauma is stored within our body, because it's so closely related to our somatic and physical reactions. I want to give you an example here, and this is one of my own stories. And I told you that sometimes here in my videos. During all of my relationships, I always had pressure in my chest, pain in my gut somehow when I was with my partners, with my exes, and a loss of appetite also quite often. I was also a bit tensioned there. And when I was with someone in a long-term relationship or in a dating phase, I never understood it, why I always had these pains. So I always said to myself, well, obviously I have this bad gut feeling here, so this must be the wrong partner for me, because this is what people say. When you have a bad gut feeling, listen to your gut feeling. That might not be a good relationship for you. But what didn't I know? I didn't know about avoidant attachment style, complex childhood trauma symptoms. So what did I do? I quit 5 long-term relationships myself because I always thought, well, it's not the right partner. I have this weird gut feeling again. But the thing is, it wasn't my intuition, it wasn't my gut feeling telling me that I should leave. No, it was not my intuition speaking. It was my trauma part wanting to protect me. Those were trauma responses, somatic symptoms. So today, with my partner right now, I focused on resolving these gut pains instead of running away again. And guess what? It got way better. I'm finally being able to live in a loving relationship because it's a trauma symptom and not my intuition speaking. Now I understood that. Symptom number 5. Do you feel flawed, wrong, or worthless? Well, then your belief system is definitely influenced here. What you do then, or what you did in the past, is you internalize that you are somehow bad or wrong. So as a child already, you might have built up a shame-bound identity here. And the consequence of that shame-bound identity is, in the here and now, you feel guilt around important things that are necessary for a healthy relationships, like you feel guilty for expressing your emotions, guilty for communicating your needs, and guilty for setting your boundaries. Around those things that are essential for making a relationship work, you have built this shame-bound identity. And you may fall into behaviors like people-pleasing, perfectionism, or procrastination instead. For example, let's say there is a person, they want to go for ice cream with you and you don't like ice cream. So you would normally say, hey, I don't like to go for ice cream. Maybe we can go for pizza. But you are afraid of communicating your needs because as a child you have been punished for doing that and you think it's wrong to do that. So instead you please people. You're a people pleaser. In this case you say, yeah, sure, let's go for ice cream. But actually you're neglecting yourself and your own needs again. So you have a poor sense of self. You're not truly connected with yourself and with your needs anymore. And some more questions here you can ask yourself, because those questions are typical examples for toxic shame in an affected belief system. Number 1, have you ever felt extremely ashamed, not because you did something wrong, but just because of your needs? Well, that's another indicator here. And again, you might feel ashamed for expressing those needs and for saying no. And second, do you feel especially guilty when saying no or communicating what you actually want and don't want in your relationships or in your professional life? Let's say your boss says, please do this task here for me, and you don't have room and space and time for that task because you're already filled up with a ton of tasks. Can you say no here? Or do you say, yeah, of course, I just try to find another time slot? And third, also when these feelings of shame and guilt appear frequently, they might come out of a deep sense of worthlessness inside you. So are you thinking that you're not good enough? Because usually this is a foundational belief here that sits below all of these other beliefs. Symptom number 6. Do you experience panic attacks regularly? And I put panic attacks here like this because let me tell you one thing. In trauma, many trauma survivors often experience panic attacks, or they think they experience panic attacks, but those panic attacks are actually traumatic re-experience things. And they are misinterpreted as panic attacks or hallucinations as well. But they're actually old traumatic events. And those old events are usually also predominantly emotional flashbacks. So acutely distress, anxiety, or fearful feelings for no apparent reason that just appear out of nowhere with no obvious narrative. And to make that more understandable for you, when you experience such a panic state, a traumatic re-experiencing, then there's not often an acute situation that you can call on or that you can remind yourself to. It's more like this emotion just comes up somewhere in a triggering situation. And those flashbacks, they pull you back into the traumatic event. This is what's happening there. And I have an example here. Have you ever had such a situation? Comment below. If you had a different one, also comment. So in that situation, let's imagine that you're out for grocery shopping. And then the worst case happens. You accidentally drop a jar and it crashes in public in the supermarket. Horrible scenario, I know. Now the loud crash makes you freeze, your heart starts pounding again, your chest tightens, and an overwhelming wave of fear and shame hits you. You feel tears coming and panic, thinking, what's wrong with me? Why can't I handle this? Why did I drop this jar? But the truth is, it was an accident. Maybe it was not even your fault, but it was an accident. And what's happening here is an emotional flashback within you. So you're not just reacting to the noise, you are being pulled back to a childhood moment where small mistakes like this led to yelling, punishment, or humiliation. Your body remembers the fear even if your mind doesn't immediately connect the dots here. That's traumatic re-experiencing. Symptom number 7. Do you exhibit the same bad behavior as your parents, or do you magically attract partners who are as dysfunctional as your parents? So in this symptom, you are reenacting unhelpful relationships from the past. And what often happens is that this is closely related to a disorganized or chaotic attachment style as well. You attract drama partners quite often, and this is why you are used to incongruent or ambivalent relationships, and that already happened to you as a child, maybe with your parents. So sometimes there is love, sometimes there is drama. It's like a constant pull-push dynamic here. And most of the time, symptoms like this, you might also create this push-pull dynamic. And those symptoms are often very predominant at important lifetime events, such as marriage, pregnancy, or childbirth, because those events trigger you because you have to commit in such situations. And commitment might also scare you. I made a full episode about that as well, the fear of commitment. Definitely check that one out if you're an avoidant attacher or someone with a disorganized attachment style. Let's see if there is an example here. Typical examples are you have the same unfavorable behaviors like your parents. And maybe you always wanted to avoid, for example, becoming like your dad, becoming like your mom. As a child, you already said that to yourself. I never want to become like my mom. I never want to become like my father. Because, for example, your mom or your dad constantly have yelled at you or have manipulated you, have screamed at you. And you never wanted to do that, but you do that with your partner, or if you already have children, maybe also with your children. Or you could also have attracted a partner who has exactly the unflattering characteristics of your mother or your father. Often that partner is also a narcissist, and you end up in a toxic relationship like your parents have been. When you are in such a relationship, it's often a good thing to end such relationships, especially with narcissists or psychopaths. And I made a full episode about when to end a relationship up here. Link that in the description below as well. Symptom number 8. Do you avoid relationships and social engagements? Now, avoidance is definitely one of the most used strategies in people with complex trauma. And we also talk about the avoidant attachment style here. Again, watch the episode, Fear of Commitment. Well, I'm also someone with an avoidant attachment style, so I can relate a lot here. Avoidance of relationships and people, what is a benefit from that? Well, it's definitely peace and safety for many of us. I made an episode, 10 reasons why we isolate. That's also linked up here in the description below. It's very accurate that isolation helps us to stabilize. So avoidance causes safety for many of us who survive childhood trauma. And avoiding relationships and specific topics in life, we do that obviously because we want to protect ourselves from experiencing hurtful or overwhelming feelings, especially those feelings that we experienced early on during traumatic events. And avoidance could also be considered as positive behavior sometimes. For example, if we distract ourselves into work, we do that instead of addressing the issues. And in our society, in a meritocracy, that's also a favorable thing. We work a lot, we achieve a lot, but actually many of us just run away from our issues. And I myself, as I said, I can definitely relate to avoidance. And my personal story, again, I quitted 5 relationships in the past. Why? Because I wanted to avoid the uncomfortable traumatic symptoms, especially somatic symptoms like pain in my gut, anxiety. I wanted to avoid conflict and the possibility of getting hurt, abandoned, criticized, or judged again. Symptom number 9. Do people often tell you things are way different than you see them? Evidence shows that some children have a fragmentation of their childhood memories, and traumatizing events are then memorized way different than the children actually experienced them. So there is a difference between how I perceived something and what actually happened here. And when those children then grow up as adults, they often also perceive things in a way different way than other people because they are biased by those early memories already. For example, people also say that to you sometimes when you have this. They say, oh, you experience things way worse than I would experience them or perceive them. You are, for example, more careless, more reckless, perceive things more this way, or you are more inattentive. And people say, why are you so inattentive? Where is your perception going? This is why. I want to give you an example here as well. And let's imagine that you're having a conversation with a friend, but halfway through you realize that you completely zoned out of the conversation. That might happen to you. You didn't hear what they say, and now you're scrambling to catch up. You feel embarrassed thinking, why can't I just focus like everyone else? Well, this could also be because of your ADHD. Made an episode about that here. A series about ADHD and complex trauma. Also really interesting topic, but also that's very typical just for complex trauma, not just for ADHD. And what's happening here in complex trauma is altered attention. Now, growing up in a chaotic or traumatic environment, your brain learned to check out or fragment memories as a way to protect you. Okay? It's like your mind developed kind of a safe mode to survive the overwhelming moments. And symptom number 10, do you struggle with body image and addiction? And that means many childhood trauma survivors struggle with body image issues, eating disorders as well, weight problems, eating issues in general, or addictions to certain foods, substances, or medication here. And an example here is from a documentary I recently watched. And there is someone whose story I like to tell you right now for this last symptom. Let's name this person Sarah. Sarah has struggled with her body image for as long as she can remember. When she grew up, she was teased about her weight and constantly compared herself to others. And now as an adult, she finds herself obsessing over every flaw in the mirror. And to numb those sensations of shame, of anxiety here, she turns to food, to alcohol, or endless scrolling on her phone. And at first, these habits feel like a quick escape, but afterwards, the cycle of shame and guilt always sets in. And she says to herself, why can't I stop? Why am I like this? I hate my body, I hate my life. And she realizes that she is trapped in a horrible cycle that leaves her feeling even worse. And that's the cycle of toxic shame and guilt again, which I talked about in that episode. Link that in the description below as well. And this is true for many of us. And if you listen now to these 10 symptoms here, which are very typical symptoms for complex childhood trauma survivors, could you identify with the stories and the symptoms? Share in the comments below if you have some of your own stories. But there is this one big question now. What can we do in order to resolve these symptoms? First of all, what's very, very important, and you did this first step if you watched the entire video, create awareness and understanding for those symptoms. Now you know them. Now you can link the reactions your body gives to you to an explanation, which is already kind of relieving. And then, if you understood them, what's next? How can we resolve them in particular? When we break that down, and I tried to break that down already in some previous videos, what you truly need to get rid of all of these symptoms is, hypothetically, a bottom-up sensation of internal safety within your body. And as I already said that in the beginning, in the intro, we often all know that rationally, that what happened in the past is not our fault, and that there are many traumatic reactions that are not our fault because it's our body trying to protect us. And usually when we are around people and our friends and our partner, it is safe. So why don't we feel this emotionally? How can we address that? From my experience, from my work, I have these books here. Okay, those are my therapy books. Therapy 2021 to 2024. I try to figure out and create a step-by-step path that you can walk to resolve these symptoms. And I came up with this pyramid idea here. Okay, on the lowest level, we always have to understand and learn first, really from a top-down approach, the most easy way out, how to re-regulate ourselves. So we need re-regulation skills first. I discussed them in this video. I made a tier list ranking all of the re-regulation skills I learned in my second therapy. We need to learn how to stay connected with ourselves, how to develop a sense of self. That's the first thing. Then it starts, okay? On level 2 of my pyramid, we need to understand that we can express all the emotions. I have this emotional wheel here, by the way. Okay, that's also in our free workbook. So we have to learn that it's okay to feel and express all the emotions that are on the emotional spectrum that we can feel as human beings. And then on level 3, we have to learn to communicate our needs, that we can say no, that we don't have to please other people, that we just can communicate what we want and what we need without feeling guilty, without procrastinating things. And then Next level is setting healthy boundaries. That's very, very, very important. It has been to me. That was the most important thing on the entire journey for me, to learn to set boundaries without feeling guilty. And from that on, we have the top 2 levels, which is building trust, self-worth, and developing a healthy identity and sense of self, which is not bound to shame anymore. I put all of these things that I learned in therapy, everything from my work with therapists, into a step-by-step path, and you can follow along that as well if you join for our courses. If you want to go more into depth with that, I created more than 30 courses on those topic where I put everything in that I learned in therapy, and you can join as a member today at understandable.net/join. Get access to the course in our community, understandable.net/join. And now I'm curious as well, what do you think about the 10 symptoms? Can you relate to them? What did you experience? Let me know in the comments below today's video. And if you want to support the podcast, leave a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. And I see and speak to you next time for another episode here on the channel. Have a great day.